I want to cover all these cities where the mafia was in the United States. From, let's say, the 1920s through, what, 1960s? It was like a puddle that spread out across America, and they ended up in these little notches all over America. My little town had 20,000 people in it. We had a mafia guy there, the Genovese family, two or three of them actually, because of the big factories, and they handled gambling. So they were everywhere. But let's go to Madison, Wisconsin. During the Prohibition, there was three guys in Madison: Paul Corona, Joe Geloso, and Anthony Musso. Musso later moved to Rockford, Illinois, became a boss and so forth. The other guys, I don't know, except Joe Gelosi. Before he was murdered in 1929, this guy named Lorenzo Salvatore. Salvatore was a sugar merchant, a wealthy sugar merchant. I imagine he had something to do with prohibition because you need sugar to make booze. He walked up behind Gelosi, fired a shotgun at him through the back. But Gelosi turned. I don't know what happened exactly, but the baby he was carrying, a year-old baby, he had his 1-year-old son in his arms, took the blast and he was killed instead. Gelosi, as I say, was murdered shortly afterwards. They found him in a ditch someplace. So the city was divided between these fractions. They were based on where in Italy they were from, and so they ruled over the little different parts of their tiny little empires. The most prominent fraction was led by this guy, Giuseppe DiMartino. He was a cop killer. He likes to be called Joe DiMartino. He was murdered on April 9, 1928. He was sitting at a home, at a store actually, of one of the guys who worked for him, when two guys, Joe Varesi and Joey Logalbo, that's his name, Logalbo, fired shotguns at him through the window, killed him immediately where he was sitting. In 1940, this guy Benedetto DiSalvo shows up, and he runs things out of a grocery store that he owns with his sons. That seems to be a tradition in the city, running mob things out of grocery stores. Their gang specialty was high dollar armed robbery. What they would do, in other words, is steal jewelry, and then you take it down to Chicago. And Chicago, for the longest time, was a center for these things. They knew the value of diamonds and jewels and so on and so forth, and they had a method to get rid of them. So it was good for the robbers. It was cold, hard cash. So DeSalvo died in 1964. He was boss for a long time. And Carlo Peter Caputo took over. Caputo immigrated to the U.S. in 1919. He was 16 years old from Sicily, Palermo, Sicily. He went to Madison, but he had been in Milwaukee for a while, and then he ended up in Madison in 1940. But originally he settled in Chicago as a teenager, and he fell in with the Aiello mob. The Aiellos were dangerous people. They were a bloody gang. They went up against Capone. So that you know, during Prohibition, Chicago sold beer. It was considered a warm weather beer, a drink. So they had it during the summer. And then they'd switch over to whiskey imports from Canada in the winter. But wine always sold. It was a large European American population as part of their tradition to drink wine. So what the Aiellos did was they went to, I've forgotten the name of the Italian ghetto in Chicago, and they would say if you lived there and you came from the old country, you knew how to make wine. I suppose a lot of people did. And they said, look, make wine, give me as much as you can, keep whatever for yourself, and I'll pay you a little up on the side from that. So they sold wine, and then they got ambitious and started moving in on the Capone operation. I want to tell you again, very seldom did you see the Capone people get out of bed in the morning, get their guns, and go shoot people. Usually you had to provoke them. They only seemed to shoot when they were shot at first. But anyway, and the Aiellos certainly shot at him first. They wiped them out. Joey Aiello is who Caputo worked for when Aiello bought the farm. Caputo and some guys who worked for him, they all got up and they moved to Madison. And they were made into the Mafia around 1935, according to the FBI. The FBI records show that Frank Balistieri, the Milwaukee boss, he just didn't like Caputo. He had a low opinion of him. He thought he wasn't draining the city of everything it should have been taken from. I think Caputo's point of view was, I live here, I'm a part of the city. We're not going to have any porn stuff. We're not going to have any dope and so forth. And Balistieri didn't go for that. So he was going to move in and take it. And Chicago, which really held sway over that part of the world, told Balistieri he should not do that and just stay where the hell he was. Caputo, as I said, he kept a low profile, stayed way, way far away from the law. The local police chief wrote a report that Caputo was constantly accidentally bumping into him and say, hey, let me buy you dinner, let me buy you breakfast, and that sort of thing. Anyway, Caputo was heavily invested in the city. As I said, he owned a Stop and Shop, big grocery store. He had a place called Carlo's Restaurant, Giuseppe's Pizza. He owned a steakhouse. He owned a liquor store. He had a lot of retail space, including an adult amusement center. He denied that he owned it. He just leased the business. I don't know about that. He was a large landowner in the city. In 1965 dollars, he was estimated to be worth $265,000 in land. And they know that because he divorced his wife and she sued, and that's how that came out. The odd thing is, this guy'd been in the country, as I said, since 16. He couldn't read or write English. But when you stop and think, well, what did he accomplish? Okay, a lot of it was illegal, but still, for a guy that can't read or write. His son was a World War II veteran. He had married well, respected member of the community. Same thing with his daughter. They had a second son who was tragically killed in a freak. It was a car accident when the boy was a junior in college. In 1967, which was really a bad year in the life of Caputo, a federal grand jury caught him on 3 counts of tax evasion, signing a false tax return. They sentenced him a miserable 30 days in jail and 2 years probation. He said he made $721 in income, and the IRS proved that he made $31,000. And geez, if you're going to lie, at least be careful. So the prosecutor in that case was this guy, Edmund Nixon, U.S. attorney. Nix, I should say, I meant to say Nix, earlier on, had worked for Caputo in one of his taverns that he owned. He was a bartender. He worked his way through law school. Just a coincidence. Caputo's underboss was a guy named Joey Aiello. He died of natural causes. He remained an underboss his whole life. It was a really small operation, though. He died in 1970. Caputo lived forever. He died in 1993 at age 90. And this is interesting. It was only after he died that the local media discovered, remarkably, that he was, I'm being sarcastic, was a boss in the local mafia. So, and even then, when they printed it, they gave him a lot of space about whether he was or was not in the mafia. There was an FBI report from May 21, 1973. It has a conversation between this Milwaukee informer, Augie Mancini, who did a lot of damage out there, and a Rockford, Illinois captain, Charles Vince, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other guys. And what he said is, look, Vince said is, up in Madison, they took a vote to disband the family, and everybody in the family agreed. So they voted themselves out of business. I didn't know the mafia could do that. In the early years of Prohibition, there's a lot of gangsters just got fed up because it was a shooting gallery up there. This guy's shooting that guy. So they said, the hell with this. They get up and they went to Rockford, Illinois, which was much more calm. And they opened up what would become the Rockford Mafia, which I think is still around, although not very strong. Tony Musso, who left Rockford in 1926, he became the boss of that thing and remained the boss of it until 1958. I'm going to do right now, in fact, another one on this guy, Vincent Troa. He moved from Rockford around the same time, 1926. He went to work for Musso, became his lieutenant, but he left the city in 1930, went to the East Coast, New York, was an operative out there, but he got murdered in Newark, New Jersey in 1935. His tale is fascinating, and I'm going to go work on that now for you.